Some of the biggest companies in history have tried to shape the future of computing. Few have had the influence, money, and market dominance that Microsoft built over the past 4 decades. With billions of dollars, millions of customers, and Windows running on most personal computers, it looked almost impossible for any competitor to challenge its position. Yet one operating system refused to disappear. It didn't have billion-dollar advertising campaigns, expensive TV commercials, or massive corporate backing. Instead, it was built by thousands of developers around the world who believed software should be open, free to improve, and available to everyone. That operating system was Linux. And the story of how it survived Microsoft's toughest years is one of the most fascinating chapters in technology. To understand why Linux became such a serious challenge, we need to go back to the 1990s. Personal computers were becoming common in homes and offices, and Microsoft Windows was rapidly becoming the standard operating system. Every new PC seemed to ship with Windows already installed. Businesses relied on Microsoft's software, developers built applications around its ecosystem, and customers became comfortable with familiar tools. From the outside, Microsoft's dominance looked unstoppable, and very few people expected an open-source operating system to become a genuine competitor. Linux had a completely different philosophy. Instead of being controlled by a single company, its source code was open for anyone to study, modify, and improve. Developers across different countries contributed new features, fixed bugs, and made the system more reliable. Universities, hobbyists, engineers, and technology companies all found value in this collaborative approach. While Windows focused on the desktop, Linux quietly became stronger behind the scenes, especially on servers where stability, flexibility, and security mattered more than flashy graphics. As Linux continued to improve, Microsoft recognized that this wasn't simply another software project. Internal documents that later became public showed that company leaders were carefully studying Linux and the growing open-source movement. They acknowledged that open-source development represented a different kind of competition because improvements could happen much faster than traditional software development. Thousands of contributors working together created an ecosystem that didn't depend on one company's budget or business decisions. Microsoft responded by emphasizing the advantages of its commercial software. Windows offered familiar interfaces, extensive support, and compatibility with the applications businesses already depended on. The company invested enormous resources into improving Windows, expanding enterprise services, and strengthening relationships with hardware manufacturers and software developers. From Microsoft's perspective, protecting the Windows ecosystem was essential because it powered much of the company's business. During the early 2000s, competition between Windows and Linux became increasingly intense, particularly in the server market. Large organizations needed operating systems capable of handling websites, databases, financial systems, and business infrastructure. Linux gained a reputation for reliability and performance, while allowing organizations to customize the system to meet their specific needs. Many companies appreciated the flexibility that open-source software provided, especially when they weren't locked into a single vendor's roadmap. At the same time, the Linux community kept growing. Different distributions made Linux accessible to different audiences. Some focused on stability for businesses, others on cutting-edge features, while several aimed to make Linux easier for everyday desktop users. Every improvement made by one developer could eventually benefit millions of users worldwide. This collaborative model created momentum that was difficult for any single competitor to slow down. One of the biggest turning points came with the rise of the Internet. As websites, online services, and cloud infrastructure expanded, Linux became an increasingly popular choice for servers. Hosting providers valued its efficiency and stability. Developers appreciated its flexibility, and system administrators became highly skilled at managing Linux environments. Without attracting much public attention, Linux quietly became the foundation powering a large portion of the modern Internet. Then smartphones changed everything. When Android was introduced, it used the Linux kernel as its foundation. Suddenly, billions of mobile devices around the world were running software built upon Linux technology. Most users never realized they were carrying Linux in their pockets every day. This dramatically expanded Linux's influence beyond traditional computers and servers, proving that open-source software could succeed on an enormous global scale. Cloud computing accelerated this trend even further. Companies building massive data centers needed operating systems that could scale efficiently, while remaining reliable under constant workloads. Linux became the preferred platform for many cloud deployments because of its flexibility and performance. As businesses migrated applications to the cloud, Linux's importance continued to grow behind the scenes, even while Windows remained dominant on consumer desktops. Ironically, the technology landscape began changing in ways few people expected. Developers increasingly preferred tools built around Linux environments. Programming languages, containers, automation platforms, and cloud-native technologies were often designed with Linux in mind. Instead of viewing Linux as a niche operating system, many software engineers considered it the default environment for building modern applications. This shift gradually influenced how technology companies approach software development. Microsoft also began changing. Under new leadership, the company's strategy evolved from treating Linux primarily as a competitor to recognizing its importance across the technology industry. Rather than resisting every aspect of open source, Microsoft started contributing to open source projects and supporting developers who relied on Linux. This wasn't a sudden transformation, but a gradual realization that customers increasingly operated in mixed environments using both Windows and Linux. One of the clearest examples of this shift was the introduction of Windows Subsystem for Linux. Instead of forcing developers to choose between Windows and Linux, Microsoft allowed Linux environments to run directly within Windows. For software developers, this removed significant barriers and made Windows a more attractive platform for programming. It represented a remarkable change from earlier years when the two operating systems were often presented as direct rivals. The transformation continued as Microsoft expanded its support for open-source technologies. The company acquired GitHub, one of the world's largest software development platforms, and continued investing in tools widely used by developers, regardless of operating system. Today, Microsoft employs engineers who actively contribute to Linux-related technologies because supporting developers has become more important than forcing them into a single ecosystem. Meanwhile, Linux continued evolving at an incredible pace. It became the operating system behind most of the world's fastest supercomputers, powered countless embedded devices, ran smart TVs, networking equipment, industrial systems, and millions of servers handling internet traffic every second. Even many people who never installed Linux on a desktop depended on it daily without realizing it, because countless online services operate on Linux infrastructure. The desktop story, however, remained different. Windows continued holding a much larger share of personal computers thanks to decades of software compatibility, familiar user experiences, gaming support, and partnerships with hardware manufacturers. Linux achieved impressive growth among enthusiasts, developers, and privacy-conscious users. But replacing Windows on consumer desktops proved far more difficult than succeeding in servers or cloud computing. Each operating system ultimately found strengths in different areas of the technology landscape. Perhaps the most interesting lesson from this story is that the outcome wasn't determined simply by money. Microsoft invested extraordinary resources into Windows and built one of the most successful software businesses in history. Linux, on the other hand, relied on collaboration, transparency, and contributions from individuals and organizations spread across the world. These two models competed for decades, and instead of one completely eliminating the other, both adapted to changing technology and changing customer needs. Today, the relationship between Microsoft and Linux is far more complex than many people realize. They still compete in certain markets, yet they also work together in ways that would have seemed impossible years ago. Businesses often use Windows desktops connected to Linux servers. Developers write code on Windows while deploying applications to Linux in the cloud. Microsoft's own cloud platform supports enormous numbers of Linux workloads, reflecting how much the industry has evolved. Looking back, the biggest surprise isn't that Linux survived. It's that open-source software fundamentally changed the technology industry without relying on the traditional playbook of billion-dollar advertising campaigns or exclusive ecosystems. Linux proved that a global community of contributors could build software capable of competing with the largest corporations on Earth. Microsoft changed because the industry changed, and the industry changed because developers and businesses embraced openness, collaboration, and flexibility. In the end, this was never simply a battle between two operating systems. It was a clash between different ideas about how software should be created, shared, and improved. One side relied on centralized control and commercial licensing, while the other embraced collaboration and open development. Decades later, both approaches still exist, but the computing world is stronger because each influenced the other. The company that once viewed Linux as a serious threat now supports many Linux-based technologies, while Linux continues powering much of the digital world we depend on every single day. That is why the story isn't about one side destroying the other. It's about how technology evolved in a way that nobody could have fully predicted, forever changing the future of computing.